It's brilliant. Are we ready? We are ready. Excellent. Well, this story goes back a long, long way. It goes back as farther than any of us can remember. In fact, actually, it goes back to a time when the world wasn't even the way we know it now. For example, nights and days, the way we currently know them, didn't exist. It was kind of random. You would have 10 years of darkness, and then you would have 1 day of light. And then you could have another 4 years of darkness, and then maybe another 2 days of light. Now, some of the animals didn't mind this randomness of the nights and days, but there were other animals who really wanted a little more regularity and a little more daylight. Rabbit's a perfect example. Now, Rabbit loved to hop around and raise her young, but she also had trouble seeing her prey coming after her, and she wanted more daylight so she would have more of a chance to be able to go out and munch on the grass and run away from her prey when she needed to. Squirrel's another example. Now, squirrel loved to climb high up onto a tree and run as fast as she could down to the end of a branch and take a flying leap onto another branch of another tree. But when the nighttime, squirrel would often miss and hit her head. And that wasn't very much fun. Now, some of the birds liked it. Obviously, some of the birds like owl enjoyed having the nighttime. They didn't mind. But there were other birds like eagle and hawk who really wanted more daylight. So one day, when the sun was shining, Eagle decided to fly all the way up to the sun and say, "Sun, a lot of us animals want you around a lot more often. There's not enough daylight. We really want to see more of you." Sun said, "Well, that's no problem. I want all the animals to be happy. So what you can do is gather all the animals together, and whatever all the animals decide you want for how much daylight and how much night you want, I will make that happen." So Eagle flew back down to the animals and said what the sun had told them. And immediately all the animals got together and stood up and said what it is that they wanted. So the biggest and strongest animal, being Bear, immediately stood up and growled, "10 years of darkness! 1 day of light!" Of course, some of the other animals had some different ideas. Skunk, for example, said, "I think there should be 4 years of darkness and 1 day of light." And then it started to get a little bit messy, and the bluebird chirped, "I think we should have daylight all the time, all the time. My children want daylight." And Badger grumbled, "Why can't it just be nighttime all the time?" And Rabbit chirped in there and said, "No, I think it should be daylight all the time as well." And obviously there weren't a lot of animals agreeing here. Then Frog stood up and said something that nobody had thought of yet, and it was a great idea. He got on his little rock and said, "1 day, 1 night." This was a brilliant idea. Nobody had thought of this. 1 day, 1 night. It was perfect, just like beads on a string, one should follow the other in perfect harmony. But Bear didn't want to be overpowered by Frog, so Bear stood up immediately and said, "Wait a minute, 10 years of darkness, 1 day of light." Soon enough, we had 2 distinct camps. We had most of the animals, which agreed with Frog that 1 day and 1 night is a good way to go, and then some of the other animals that sided with Bear. So Eagle had to fly all the way back up to the sun and say, "The animals simply can't agree." So Sun said, "Well, there's only one way to solve this. The animals should elect 1 animal from each group to be their representative. And whichever representative could state their mind and speak what it is that they want the longest should have their way." So Eagle flew back down, said the message. Bear, of course, immediately was going to be the representative for his group. Who else would be? And Bear laughed and laughed when he heard that Frog would be his opponent. Bear was sure that Sun wouldn't even be able to hear Frog croaking, because he was so loud and powerful. So the day came for the mighty competition to happen. Bear clambered up onto his side of the riverbank. Frog hopped onto his side of the riverbank. Now, Bear didn't even wait for Sun to give the cue to start. Bear immediately started growling, "10 years of darkness, 1 day of light. 10 years of darkness, 1 day of light." Bear actually found, as powerful as he was, his voice wasn't that. He didn't have a lot of stamina. So very quickly he started to get a little bit raspy. Meanwhile, Frog waited for Sun to give the cue to begin. Patiently stood on his rock. One day, one night, one day, one night. Soon enough, Bear started to get a little tickle in his throat. 10 years of darkness, one day of light. Went to the river, had some water. His voice came back. 10 years of darkness, one day of light. Didn't last long. Eventually, Bear was maniacally mouthing all the words, but no sounds were coming out. Frog, meanwhile, was just getting warmed up. One day, one night. So, of course, as we have now, we have one day and one night. Frog is still going. In fact, on a warm summer's night, if you go out to a pond and you have a little listen, you probably would see Frog sitting right there. And if you were able to speak Frog, you'd probably hear him saying, one day, one night. The story isn't quite over yet. Now we've explained why we have one day and one night. But we also have seasons. Sometimes we have longer days and longer nights. What happens is, when the weather starts to get a little bit cool, Frog goes and sits on a rock, sits underneath a rock somewhere and tries to warm up. And then Bear comes out, and once again, 10 years of darkness, one day of light. The Sun is a little bit intimidated by Bear, so when Bear is growling the way he does, Sun moves across the sky a little bit quicker each day, and the days get shorter and shorter. But when the really cold winter sets in, Bear goes away and hibernates for a couple of months. So Sun gets a little bit braver and braver, and takes a little bit longer every day to travel across the sky, and soon enough we have spring and then summer again. What I find really interesting about this story, though, is, isn't it always true that among all the animals, and especially the people, it isn't always the loudest and strongest who gets their way? It's the one who sets their intention, says what they want, and sticks to their ideals.
Thank you.